We're here with Bill Fulkerson and Kyle Kutcha, the filmmakers behind Survival of the Film Freaks, a documentary that explores the phenomenon of cult film in America and how it survives in the 21st century. It premieres this weekend at Horror Hound Weekend on Sunday the 26th as part of their film festival. And we're here to talk with the filmmakers behind it. So, hi, guys.
Hello.
So, it's funny, like, Bill, I became familiar with you through your long-running podcast, Outside the Cinema. And Kyle, when I first met him, he was working behind the counter at a really cool coffee shop that no longer exists called Jump Cut Cafe. And when I first saw him, it kind of blew my mind because he was wearing the Nicolas Cage Outside the Cinema shirt. And it was like, oh, whoa, like somebody else listens to that, like in my periphery. That's awesome. How did you guys like wind up meeting? How did you guys wind up, connecting on this?
Well, it started as a pen pal relationship in prison.
Beautiful.
There.
I got introduced to Bill through Christy Jett, who was working at Fright Rags at the time, because I was doing a documentary about horror conventions. And she had suggested Phantasm, and she had suggested reaching out to a few people, particularly at Rock and Shock, because that was like the main one that I was going to, that I knew that I wanted to see people at. So she suggested Bill and Chris, and the three of us hit it off really well. Like, they were probably two of the best interviews that I had for that documentary. And then we just stayed in contact. I mean, we kept in touch. Like, I came on the show a couple times. I was a listener myself. And so, yeah, we just kept kind of in contact there until Bill reached back out to me with this idea for Survival of the Film Freaks.
Awesome. So, Bill, how did you come about this idea? And first off, well, let's back up. Like, could you define what a film freak is?
I consider it just exactly what it sounds like. Somebody that just really loves movies, and just, loves, everything about them from top to bottom, not even just the movie itself, but like, is into the directors, is into technical aspects, how it relates to other things. Somebody that just loves it. It's, it's an all encompassing thing. So I think it's more than it's anyone really. I think that is more than just into watching movies.
And then and you've always been not just movies in particular, but I mean, Outside the Cinema is now like, it's got to be like in the 800s as far as episodes go. Like, you've been doing a long running cult film podcast.
Yeah, this January will be 11 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably, if you include all the episodes, it's probably close to 1,000, because there was a run there when we were doing really well that we were doing 2 to 3 shows a week. Mm-hmm. And our regular episodes are at like 540 something. So yeah, it's probably, between close to 1,000, I think, at this point, probably. Yeah,
that is a lot of cult film. Like, what attracts you to cult films?
Too much.
What about cult films? Like, what about cult films appeals to you? Like, what makes it, what draws you to them?
I mean, it's hard to say, because I've always been drawn to them ever since I was a kid. I used to rent videos at the local video store, Gold Star Video on Route 1 in Raleigh, Massachusetts. And I was curious about that stuff. I guess it probably really started with my dad. He would rent videos, and we had the 2 VCRs, and he would use the quote unquote dubbing cables, and he would put them together, and he would just rent stuff. And this is back when there wasn't a video store in every corner, and he would just like rent whatever, and then he would copy whatever. So like, I was 8 years old, and I had a tape that had Police Academy, Porky's 2, and Friday the 13th Part 4 on it. So, and I would just watch, and the Friday the 13th was the one that always kind of like drew me in. And I don't know whether it's because I saw it when I was so young, so I didn't really get like a real like chance to look at other stuff first or not, but it just always drew it to me. And then, as it gets, further into the cycle of VHSs and stuff, box art becomes such a big deal, and box art draws you in, and then, trailers draw you in. And I always just wanted to watch stuff that looked interesting, and that was always the stuff that looked more interesting.
Yeah. And then the film itself, it talks not only about the films, but also kind of the fandom behind them, the people that watch these and kind of obsess with them. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it touches on that a little bit, particularly because we have different generations of people in the film. So, we're talking to, older directors who saw their first films in the 40s and 50s. And then, we're talking people who kind of came into their own in the 80s and 90s. So it's like really cool generationally to see how people got into flicks.
Cool. And then Phantasm, kind of chronicled like fan conventions and stuff. And there's kind of a overlap there in terms of theme. Kyle, as a filmmaker, like what kind of draws you to that aspect of this?
I think that it started all personally too. I mean, I wanted to make the documentary about horror conventions because that was a community that I found to be really like welcoming and open and accepting in a lot of ways. So it was like that was where I found my people of common interest, and I think cult films, the cool thing that kind of parallels the two docs or the two topics is that cult film is based in that camaraderie and is based in that communal gathering. Like horror conventions are, yes, they're based in a communal gathering, but their topic is horror. Like cult film has to be a cult film because of the community, so it's like both of those things are really cool because there's a respect for the people that you're watching those films with or talking about those films with. There's a common ground, and that can't exist without some sort of community there. So it was cool to kind of have those things back and forth. And the convention scene is just something that both Bill and I are pretty comfortable in because that's where a lot of our interests and careers kind of started or gathered some steam. So it was cool to have like kind of an arm come off of that in Survival of the Film Freaks. I think we lost Zeke.
Talk to us about how you guys came to work on this. Kyle, you've never worked with a co-director before, and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong. This is your first your first time making a film, right?
Yeah, this is my first, other than like little things that I produced for the podcast for like, we used to do video stream and stuff, but yeah, I didn't make any shorts or anything first. I just kind of dove in head first.
And then, so, I mean, you've been outside the cinema for any of our fans that haven't listened to it. It is a extraordinarily well-produced podcast. I mean, it is radio quality. And, so you clearly have a lot of skills on the producerial level as well as on a technical level. What of your skill set kind of, did you find like transferred very easily over to film? And then was there anything that you were kind of like, whoa, I'm kind of out of my depth here, or had to kind of like have a kind of a steeper learning curve?
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. Anyone that thinks they can just, pick up an iPhone and make a movie, it's not that simple. I mean, but working with Kyle, I was really lucky because we each kind of brought our own skill set to the project. So the project came from an idea. I wrote like, this long, like manifesto outline rambling thing. And then when we decided to move through, we had a plan. So Kyle, going to film school, was able to work on the technical stuff. Like he knew like what to do to set up lights, and, he had a camera and he knew the lenses and he knew that stuff. But I was able to sit down in that seat and I can fire off interviews, no problem. I'm not good at a lot of stuff, but I'm good at interviewing. So that really was able to that was the thing that I think that transferred over the best, because the first day of filming, we sat down with Ted Raimi, and, you sit down across from Ted Raimi. That's a pretty, that seems like it could be a pretty daunting task. But once I started asking questions and Kyle had everything already set up and ready to go, we were able to flow, and it became a well-oiled machine very quickly, because we both brought something to the table that the other might not necessarily have been able to do, or, vice versa. Because there's parts of the film where there was times when we were filming where Kyle had to be on his own and had to set everything up and interview. And then I had times where I was doing interview and set up and all that stuff. So, it really, for me, it really made me appreciate right off the bat having Kyle to take care of the stuff that he knew that he was going to hit every time. And I'm not going to speak for him, but I would assume the other way, where it was the same thing, where it was like, okay, this is Bill's thing. you know, I'm gonna do my best on this stuff, and then we're gonna work on what makes each other work best.
Oh, that's exactly what it was on my end too. I mean, like one of the biggest things that I learned from Phantasm is that ultimately, like, I mean, I'm okay, but I'm no Bill Fulkerson when it comes to interviewing, and I mean that like very wholeheartedly. Like Bill, you know, I went into my first doc with the same list of questions for everybody and no concept of like where it's going to go, and I just kind of piled it and made it all somewhat work, you know, like it was manageable. But Bill, like, he was very in tune and kept track of everything that anybody said, and if we needed to like fill in a blank or get this person to talk about a specific topic, or he was just ready to go in that mindset. And that is something that like I don't have or didn't have, you know. I might have a little bit of it now, luckily, but you know, it was, you know, we really brought both of those things to the table, I think.
Well, so did you find, Bill, did you find that like when interviewing the process of interviewing somebody for the documentary, was there much difference in what you do in terms of interviewing people for the show?
I mean, different in the sense of people are going to need to be able to see it afterwards. And, you know, with the podcast, it's like you can interview in your underwear and a dirty t-shirt. Like, so there's that side of it.
You me, so.
But I mean, overall, no, my interview style is very matter of fact and conversational. And we were lucky because most of the people we interviewed were in that same mindset of they were more concerned with having a good conversation about this stuff rather than just answering questions. And there was a few times where some of the people we worked with were definitely more inclined to just kind of like answer questions 1, 2, 3. But then they came to realize, you know, this is more of a conversational thing. And that's where the best stuff in the movie came from, was people being open to, you know, being allowed to tell their stories and not just being like, no, this is what we're focusing on. Let's talk about this. Letting people flow. And, you know, like a perfect example is we have Graydon Clark, who directed Black Shampoo and Satan's Cheerleaders. And he had amazing stories about his stuff. Although the movie's not about his stuff, we got a good amount of stuff we were able to pull from telling stories that if we had kind of not been so conversational, we might not have got otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the cool thing about documentary, is that like as you are making it, you know, you kind of like learn new things, and you kind of like go through, you know, something enabled a different avenue. Kyle, was there any point in this documentary, in this process, and Bill, feel free to chime in, if where it kind of led you to somewhere that you were not expecting?
Yeah, actually, I think, you know, Bill came to me with this kind of layout notes that he's written for over the course of 4 years or something, just like little like inklings, thoughts, whatever, that he would want to explore in some way. And so at some point in time, maybe we interviewed about 25 people, maybe about 7 to 10 interviews in, we start realizing how important cable television was to almost everybody. And I think that was one thing that we knew, like there was like maybe one or two questions in our initial, you know, question list. But we didn't really like think to spend a lot of time on that. And it actually became pretty prominent in what we were talking about, which was really cool because that was really fun to explore. You know, a lot of like the old HBO stuff. And Zeke, actually, when we talked to you, you brought up, you know, a lot of people wouldn't know John Carpenter's stuff, particularly The Thing or Big Trouble in Little China. I mean, without cable television, you know. So it was really cool that we found out. We got some content for that. And I think, you know, the last third of the film explores the age of technology and what that really does for cult cinema. And I think we just didn't know where that was all going to go. You know, like we had ideas and thoughts and whatever, but, you know, hearing from everybody and everybody's take on it, we just had to figure it out, you know.
It's cool. That's really cool. So Bill, this goes back, the process of you planning and wanting to do this documentary goes back years. Like, what was it about the subject that really made you, like, you know, want to explore it, or what was, yeah, just kind of, take us through like the germ of the idea, like where did it come from, and what was your key interest in doing this?
I mean, the catalyst for the movie came from a conversation going back to horror conventions again, a conversation I had with Adam Green about 5 or 6 years ago now, I guess. He was there doing, convention appearance. And at the time it was like, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months around the time, give or take, of the release of Frozen. And it was getting released in theaters, but it hadn't quite hit the DVD market or any of that stuff, because you got to go think back 4 or 5 years, like Netflix and like Amazon Prime. They're not, they weren't then what they are now. So him and I were just having a conversation, and he was all pissed off, and I was just kind of like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, Frozen hit the torrent sites this morning. And I was like, I'm like, that sucks. And he was like, so he just kind of, him and I just started talking about it, and he was all like, like pissed off. He's like, as you would expect him to be, he's like, he's like, I saw one site this morning. He's like, it's downloaded 120,000 times. And I, played the devil's advocate of like, yeah, but out of those 120,000 times, how many of those people would have actually watched the movie otherwise? And so we kind of just had a little bit of a back and forth conversation about it, but it kind of got this idea in my head of how different finding movies and watching movies is now as compared to 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. So from that conversation, just a little bit here and there, I would just kind of do a little bit of research on like, well, how did this movie become a cult movie? And I'd like take a look at, played in drive-ins in 1972 and then was never seen again until it showed up on Thriller Video in 1985. And then, then it disappeared again and was released on DVD in 2006. And just getting an idea of like how these movies would become the movies they would, be in that cult world. And it just like doing the podcast, and finding these gems of stuff like Alabama's Ghost and Mardi Gras Massacre and these movies that like nobody thinks twice about. You come to realize how many people out there also enjoy this stuff. So I thought it'd be a great idea to try to, entertain and educate with a documentary to speak through all of this stuff, giving the history and, the fun stuff, but also then teaching people about how we can try to continue to create cult movies in this new digital world, because it's not the same, but it is exactly the same at the same time. It's just a different, technology and different world that we live in. So, after like 3.5, 4 years or whatever, talked to Kyle and was like, hey man, would you be interested in working on another documentary? And he was like, what's the right idea? And I'm like, all right, can I pitch you something? And I pitched him the idea and then sent him, 10 pages of notes that I still don't know how he got through the notes, because I went back and looked at some of the stuff, and it is like, people say stream of consciousness. It is like,
it was
like the rantings of a madman when I go back and look at it. But he read through it and then he was like, yeah, man, this sounds awesome. And I think we can do it. So then we got the ball rolling on, okay, what do we need to get actually to do this? And, here we are 2 years and a few months later, and it's done, and it's going to be released to the world soon. So
that's really awesome. So was there anybody, that you guys were interviewing that I know, Bill, you've interviewed quite a number of people, on the show. Was there anybody that like you had not interviewed before? Was there anybody that you guys were like kind of nervous about talking to, or somebody that agreed to go on the doc that you were kind of surprised or excited to see, like, it was kind of unexpected that you got, because you got some really cool names on here,
Yeah. Ted Raimi was nerve-wracking mostly because it was the first one.
Yeah.
So it was the type of thing where it was like my first time on a set, like our first interview for this, documentary that we want to get done. So that was nerve-wracking. And he's a character, man. He's a high-strung dude, and he's back and forth and he's everywhere. So, but after that, it wasn't too bad. But I think going to the Trauma studio, the offices or studio, whatever you want to call it, was a pretty surreal experience, because I don't know what I really expected going in there, but upon like going into it, it's exactly what you would expect it to be. It's like this rundown, beat up, but we were setting stuff up and we were trying to figure out where we're going to interview Lloyd Kaufman. And of course they're like, people talk to him at the desk. So Kyle and I were like, well, we don't want to talk to him at the desk then.
Mm-mm.
So we're like, We go in, he shows us, his assistant guy shows us the basement, and their basement is filled with 35 millimeter prints, DAT tapes, 16 millimeters, 8 millimeters, the original cable production stuff, all of this just amazing stuff. And then I was like, this just got really real with stuff.
Mhm.
So, I don't really know where I was going with that, but so we
It was
interviewed.
daunting. It was like, it was weirdly, it wasn't daunting because Lloyd is like, will always talk to people, but
Yeah.
it is daunting in the sense that Lloyd will also go into Lloyd Kaufman mode where he's trying to sell us Troma movies for 20 minutes. And I think that's how, I would say that's how he weeds out people.
Mhm.
That's how, like, I tried to interview him for Phantasm, and I got so shook because he was like in full salesperson mode that I didn't use anything. But like Bill really stuck with it and stuck with him. And I think also being in that environment, like we were in the Troma basement where all of his work is surrounding him. Like at some point he has to realize that, like, hey, this is serious, and like, you know, we're actually talking cult here, you know. And Bill really stuck with him on it, and we got a lot of good stuff out of Lloyd after the initial like Troma hump that we had to do.
When I think too, going back to the being really conversational, once he kind of realized, like you said, you know, weeding out not the bad stuff, but once he kind of realized that, number one, we knew what we were talking about, and number two, we were really interested in like getting deeper than just like, hey, you directed Toxic Avenger, that's awesome, dude. Like he opened up and like gave us stuff that I've seen a lot. Lloyd's obviously been in a lot of documentaries, but he gave us stuff that I haven't seen him talk about in other documentaries. And it was nice because we had him in a different area. I mean, it was Troma, so we had this awesome shot, and then he's like, bring in the Toxie head, and like, so they bring in this giant foam Toxie head and cover up all the prints, and I'm like, oh, but you know what, it's Lloyd Kaufman, so you kind of expect to have that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it goes back to just like, we knew what we were talking about, and the same thing goes the other one that was daunting was Joe Bob Briggs, which was amazing and legitimately one of the best experiences of my life, was being able to sit and talk movies with him for like almost an hour. And then it's like this amazing thing, but then you're like, we have like 50 something minutes of footage, and we're going to use like 8 minutes of it. So, but that was really cool because it's Joe Bob Briggs. So
yeah, Bill, you're not only like a really good interviewer, but you're a great interviewee because you manage to always throw in these perfect segues to my next question, which is like, kind of talk about, you have all this great material from everybody, and then like, how do you weed that down? It's like, I work in documentary as kind of my day job, so like I understand how difficult it can be to weed a bunch of like really great bites and everything down. Kind of walk me through the process of how you guys, you know, found the stuff that made it into the film.
So we, at the time of editing, or at least trying to edit, we were 3,000 miles away from each other. So at least starting the process, I was living in LA, Bill's in Boston. And so Bill would go through, he would go through each and every interview multiple times, and he would write out like little sheet. I wonder if I have one here. I do. So he'd write out like a little, you know, the time code and the clip that he thought was going to be good. And then he would message it to me, and I'd go through and I'd pull all of those. And so once we went through all the interviews and pulled all of them, then I started trying to categorize by what the topic was. So then, you know, we would do 70s cult. Like we would talk about, if we were talking about physical media, we would do if we were talking about torrenting or about VHS box art or whatever. So a lot of that was just us pulling as many sound bites as would work, categorizing, and then just weeding out. I always describe it as emptying out a 1,000-piece puzzle and just figuring it the fuck out. Like you just have to, you know, but somehow there's like 5 different ways that puzzle can be too. It's like somehow it just works. So, and then luckily I ended up I moved back to New England, and it made things a little bit easier, though we actually didn't meet too much in person to do it, because at this point we had a layout and an idea of what we wanted to do, and I just kind of kept plugging things in. And sending Bill a draft, and he'd send me some notes, and I'd find filler somewhere, and it flushed out into what we think is a really solid 85-minute doc.
Yeah, it's funny though too, because we early on were like, all right, we're gonna probably need to hire an editor for this because it's a pretty daunting project, and we were very much so like in the mindset of like, if we're gonna spend some money, let's spend it on an editor. And I got it in my mind that we would need to hire an outside editor for this, mostly just because we weren't going to be able to handle it ourselves.
Right.
So, I mean, this is, we were lucky enough to have, a little bit of money come in from someone to help out with the travel and stuff. But we were like, let's try to, get like all the basics. So Kyle was like, all right, I'll get all the basics done. And then we figure we'll get like a skeletal idea, and then we'll talk to an editor. So Kyle worked on stuff, we sent things back and forth, and he was sending me little bits and pieces. So he would send me like the section on the 70s, the section on the 80s. And then he was like, so where do you think we're at? And I was like, well, if you put these all together, that's the movie. And I'm like, we don't need to hire an editor. I'm like, this is exactly what we want the movie to be. So, we saved a nice chunk of money in that, mindset, but then also we can still say that like, this is the movie that we wanted to make. And I mean, who knows, whose hands it ends up in and whatever happens. But like, we know that this cut that we're bringing to festivals is the movie that we wanted to make because we made it. Nobody else's hands were on it. The only outside hands that were ever on this was the audio guy. And that was just making the audio work. But all of this film, everything that's in there is everything that we wanted to put in.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
I unfortunately have to scoot and go to work.
Talk shit about him now.
Yeah, no. So you guys have had it. Zeke, thank you so much, man. Not only for doing this, but being a part of the doc. Because I'm really excited for you to see it. Because you got some good bites in there, man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I remember I just come off work and like my mind was just so fried. So I'm glad I was able to give you guys something.
You did great. It was awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you. I gotta figure out how to hang up. Bye.
It's gonna shut everything down now.
Yes.
Cool. So now we got rid of him.
To all the smack talk.
So now that like you've kind of climbed this mountain of it's like you didn't even do like a short film. You just jumped in and did a fucking feature. Like
I know, right? That's looking back on it now, man. It's kind of like, what the hell was I thinking? But it worked out. So.
I'm really excited to see it. The trailers look great. I love the graphics and everything that you guys are doing with the Film Freak Friday stuff. By the way, if should absolutely viewers follow them on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. They post some really cool content on there, stuff with Joe Bob Briggs, stuff with Lloyd Kaufman. The other
none of that's in the movie either. All those clips are stuff that we didn't end up using.
That's awesome. That is really awesome. And it's great that you guys got like Lloyd Kaufman to kind of break that, because he's a lot like Stan Lee in that way of like, I'm just going to sell stuff. So I'm really interested to hear that. But like now that you've kind of climbed this mountain, like, are you going to attempt another one?
I mean, yeah, Kyle and I have a couple different projects we've been tossing around. But we want to make sure that we give survival its due and its focus. So we have two ideas that both of us like that we think will move forward in, and hopefully we get a good festival run out of survival, and somebody picks it up and is willing to work with us on something else, because I'm sure self-financing a project of this size is a very, very nerve-wracking thing. And we were lucky to get a little bit of help, and that help was able to get it so that we were able to travel crisscross the country 2 or 3 times. But I would hope that for the next project that we could definitely like work within, not necessarily even like a studio, but like have like a more set plan on what we can actually do. We've got ideas for another documentary, and then we've got ideas for like a mockumentary, and then we even got some narrative ideas for stuff. So, yeah, we're definitely going to do something else. It's just at least, a year away before we really start to focus on something like that.